Marissa Clarke walked into the Dayton farmer's market with a designer handbag, a calm smile, and $50,000 in cash by sunset. Every mother in town would be whispering her name in fear. It was an ordinary Wednesday morning in Dayton, Ohio, the kind of day that felt like it could never hold a headline. The sun was out, the breeze was soft, and the town's farmer's market was already filling with chatter. Vendors arranged their fresh produce in neat piles, coffee carts hissed and steamed, and mothers pushed strollers between flower stands. It was the picture of calm, a safe and familiar rhythm that made people forget anything bad could ever happen here. Among the crowd was a woman named Marissa Clarke. At first, she blended in completely. She wore a pale yellow blouse, her hair pinned neatly, her makeup light and careful. She smiled at vendors, asked about prices, and carried a large designer handbag that looked just a bit too new for the rest of her. To anyone watching, she seemed pleasant, even kind. There was nothing unusual about her, not at first. But as the morning passed, something began to ripple quietly through the market. It started as a whisper, a strange story passed between stalls. A young mother at the coffee stand mentioned it first, saying a woman had approached her with an odd question about her baby. She wasn't angry, just confused, unsure if she had heard correctly. Another vendor overheard, frowned, and said a similar thing had happened to one of his regular customers just an hour earlier. Soon, the story began to spread. The details changed slightly with every retelling, but the heart of it stayed the same. A well-dressed woman had walked up to mothers holding babies and asked something no one could quite believe. The first few people brushed it off, assuming it was gossip or misunderstanding. After all, who would say something like that out loud? Around noon, one of the fruit sellers noticed Marissa again. She was no longer browsing but watching, standing a little too still, her eyes following a young woman pushing a stroller. The vendor felt uneasy, though he couldn't say why. When the woman in the stroller paused, Marissa walked up to her, smiled, and leaned close. The mother's face went from polite confusion to shock in a heartbeat. She gathered her child and hurried away, leaving Marissa standing alone beside the fountain. That moment drew attention. People began to stare, whispering more openly now. Some of the mothers moved closer together, forming quiet circles, holding their babies a little tighter. The market, usually full of friendly noise, grew tense in an odd, almost invisible way. No one called the police just yet. No one even knew what they'd report. The story felt too strange, too unreal, but the sense that something was deeply wrong hung in the air. Marissa, meanwhile, seemed unfazed. She walked calmly from stall to stall, still smiling, still carrying that same large handbag. By the end of the day, nearly every mother in the market had heard the rumor. Some said she offered something, others said she simply asked strange questions about babies and families. But everyone agreed on one thing. The woman in yellow wasn't just another shopper. She was looking for something or someone, and whatever it was, it didn't belong in a place like Dayton. The market closed early that day, the last few people leaving with a quiet unease that would turn into headlines by the next morning. By the time the sun began to dip behind the roofs of Dayton's small shops, the whispers had become something heavier. The market that had started the day in its usual cheerful rhythm was now uneasy and alert. Vendors glanced at each other, unsure if they were overreacting. Mothers kept their babies close, some even packing up early, saying they didn't feel comfortable staying any longer. Everyone noticed that the same woman, the one in the pale yellow blouse, was still there, walking slowly through the aisles as if nothing unusual had happened. Marissa Clarke moved with quiet confidence, her steps steady, her eyes scanning faces. She spoke softly to anyone who would listen. Most people avoided her, pretending to be busy, but a few mothers said later that they had been too surprised to walk away. She had seemed calm, polite, even gentle, but her words had been wrong in every way. And she carried that handbag everywhere she went, the one that seemed almost too heavy for what it was. It was just after lunch when a young mother sitting near the fountain called the police. She had been approached by Marissa, who took out her wallet, opened it wide, and showed a thick stack of cash crisp $100 bills carefully folded and wrapped with a rubber band. The mother said her hands shook as she realized what was happening. Marissa spoke quietly, almost kindly, as if what she was saying made perfect sense. The mother didn't wait to hear everything. She stood up, grabbed her stroller, and ran straight to the security booth near the parking lot. When the officers arrived, Marissa didn't run. She didn't even look nervous. She stood beside her car, the large handbag now resting on the hood, her keys in hand. The officers asked her a few questions, and witnesses gathered in small groups nearby, pretending not to watch. Some people filmed from a distance, their phones half hidden behind cups of lemonade. Inside Marissa's car, the police found something that made everyone fall silent. There was a baby car seat already buckled in the back. The passenger seat held a folded blanket and a small stuffed rabbit, still with a store tag. In the trunk, they found a brand new crib, flat-packed and unopened, along with several envelopes filled with money. Each envelope had a name written in neat handwriting. None of the names matched hers. When the officers asked why she had so much cash and baby supplies, Marissa answered in the same calm, steady tone she had used all day. Her voice didn't shake, and she didn't seem afraid. It was as if she couldn't understand why everyone was upset. She said she hadn't done anything wrong. The mothers who had seen her earlier stood together near the fountain, clutching their children. No one spoke much, but every face carried the same question. Who was this woman, and what had she planned to do? As Marissa was placed in the police car, the market grew quiet again. Only the sound of the evening wind moved through the empty stalls. For years, the people of Dayton had believed their town was a safe, predictable place. But that night, as the lights went out across the market square, everyone realized that something dark had been hiding in plain sight all along. The story that had started as a whisper at the farmers' market spread through Dayton like wildfire. By the next morning, it was on every local news station, and reporters were standing outside the police department waiting for an update. The name Marissa Clarke appeared in headlines, though most people still struggled to believe what they were hearing. She didn't fit the image of a criminal. She was neat, soft-spoken, and polite. To her neighbors, she had always seemed ordinary, maybe even a little lonely, but certainly harmless. That image began to crumble as investigators started to uncover her past. Detectives discovered that Marissa's life had once looked picture perfect. Just a few years earlier, she had lived in a large two-story home with her husband, running a small but promising online business selling handmade candles. Photos on social media showed her smiling on beaches, posing in front of a new car, and celebrating anniversaries. Friends said she was ambitious, the kind of person who always needed things to look perfect. But beneath the glossy photos was a life falling apart. 6 months before her arrest, her business had collapsed. The company she had partnered with went bankrupt, taking her savings with it. Soon after, her husband filed for divorce, moving out and taking most of the furniture with him. When police searched her current apartment, they found eviction notices tucked behind the door. It became clear that the confident woman at the market had been living on the edge of ruin. Then came the detail that made the case even more unsettling. A hospital record showed that a year earlier, Marissa had given birth to a stillborn baby girl. The loss had devastated her. She had spent months in and out of counseling but eventually stopped going. Friends said she withdrew from everyone, deleting her social media accounts, quitting her local church group, and barely leaving home. One neighbor told investigators that she often heard soft music late at night, lullabies playing through thin apartment walls. Another remembered seeing boxes of baby clothes delivered to her doorstep long after her due date had passed. Inside her small apartment, detectives found traces of that life she had been trying to rebuild from memory. A nursery had been set up in the corner of her bedroom. There was a crib assembled, pink sheets neatly tucked in, and stuffed animals arranged in a perfect line. The closet was full of baby dresses, all new, all folded with care. On the nightstand was a framed ultrasound photo and a candle burned halfway down. The room looked less like a home and more like a shrine. The more investigators learned, the clearer it became that Marissa hadn't simply snapped in one day at the market. She had been preparing for something, quietly, for months. Each decision, buying the baby clothes, saving the money, researching adoption paperwork, was part of a plan she never shared with anyone. It wasn't rage or confusion driving her, it was obsession carefully disguised as hope. By the time the detectives closed her apartment door, the story of Marissa Clarke had transformed from something strange into something tragic. What began as a bizarre rumor in a peaceful town was now the portrait of a woman who had lost everything and refused to let go of what was already gone. In the days after her arrest, the investigation into Marissa Clarke deepened. Police sifted through every corner of her apartment, every email, every message she had sent, and every item she had purchased. What they found painted a picture of someone who had carefully studied families with babies for months. Notebooks were stacked neatly on a small desk in her bedroom, each page filled with lists, locations, times, and observations. Parks, playgrounds, daycare centers, and local parenting groups were all marked with meticulous notes. Besides, some entries were words like friendly, trusting, or easy to approach, written in her neat handwriting. Other entries were darker, watch closely, perfect timing, don't hesitate. Detectives discovered photographs tucked into the pages of her notebooks. Many were of mothers with infants, taken from a distance on swings or benches. Marissa had circled certain faces in red pen and added notes about the children's age, hair color, and routines. At first, the photos looked like harmless snapshots, but as the police compared them to the mothers at the market, a chilling pattern emerged. She had been observing the same type of woman for months, learning their habits, waiting for a moment when she could approach without drawing attention. Her laptop contained messages from online parenting forums and social media accounts she had created under different names. In them, she posed as a potential babysitter, a friend, or someone offering donations. The messages were gentle, friendly, and persuasive, each carefully written to gain trust. Yet hidden between the lines were personal notes to herself, reminders of her plan. One message read, "Wait until she trusts me," and another said, "If this doesn't work, try another." These notes revealed the extent of her obsession and the deliberate nature of her actions. Marissa had also made plans to travel. Investigators found a plane ticket to another state, booked under a false name. The date was just 3 days after her arrest. Alongside the ticket were printed directions, hotel reservations, and a map marked with locations where she thought she could meet mothers and their babies. Police realized that she intended to leave Dayton with a child she had planned to acquire, taking every precaution to avoid detection. The envelopes of cash found in her car were even more telling. Each was labeled with a name different from hers, and some contained handwritten notes specifying an amount. Police believed she had planned to offer these sums to mothers she had identified as targets, carefully testing the limits of trust and desperation. The level of preparation, the attention to detail, and the deliberate secrecy made it clear that this was not a sudden decision but a fully developed plan. When detectives pieced together everything from the notebooks, messages, photographs, and travel plans, the story became impossible to ignore. Marissa Clarke's actions were not impulsive, and they were not the result of confusion or panic. They were the product of months of calculated preparation, fueled by grief, obsession, and a desire to replace what she had lost. Every step she had taken, every observation she had made, was part of a plan designed to achieve one goal, no matter the cost. As police compiled the evidence, they realized the investigation had revealed something deeper than a crime. It had uncovered a mind consumed by loss, planning, and a willingness to cross every line to fulfill an impossible desire. Marissa Clarke's story had become not just a case of attempted abduction, but a haunting reminder of how grief could warp a life and turn careful planning into something dangerous and unthinkable. When Marissa Clarke finally faced questioning, her calm demeanor remained unchanged. She spoke softly, almost matter-of-factly, claiming she had meant no harm. Her explanation centered on helping a child in need, a story that sounded rehearsed and carefully framed. But as investigators laid out the evidence, the notebooks filled with observations, the photos, the travel plans, the envelopes of cash, the story she told unraveled almost immediately. Every carefully constructed detail she had hoped would make her actions appear benevolent instead painted a picture of deliberate intent. In court, the room was silent as the prosecution presented the findings. The images from her notebooks were shown one by one, each photo highlighting mothers she had monitored and circled. Pages from her messages revealed the notes she had written to herself about timing, opportunity, and how to gain trust. Even the plane ticket and hotel reservations were introduced as proof that she had intended to leave the state with a child she did not have the right to take. Witnesses from the farmers' market described the day in painstaking detail, explaining the fear that spread as she approached mothers with stacks of cash in her hands. Marissa's defense argued that she had been grieving and acting out of a desperate longing for a child she had lost. Psychologists brought in for evaluation testified about her stillbirth and the profound impact it had on her mental state. They described her actions as obsessive, born from trauma rather than criminal intent. Yet, the evidence was too precise, too calculated to be dismissed as impulsive behavior. It was clear that while grief may have fueled her, planning and preparation had guided her actions. The judge noted this distinction during sentencing. He described her actions as carefully orchestrated, meticulously prepared, and deeply troubling, the calm with which she approached the mothers. The lengths she had gone to monitor and record their routines, and the false identities she had created all demonstrated intent beyond simple desperation. 7 years in prison was handed down as her sentence, a punishment meant to reflect the seriousness of her attempt while acknowledging the complex motivations behind it. The mothers she had approached experienced a mixture of emotions after the case concluded. Relief, fear, anger, and pity were all present. They had faced the terrifying reality of someone trying to purchase a child, yet the woman responsible had not appeared overtly violent or threatening. This ambiguity left a lingering unease that stayed with the community for months. Parents became more vigilant at parks, and local news followed every development, reinforcing the sense that even in a quiet town, danger could appear in the most unlikely forms. Marissa Clarke herself remained composed as she was led away. She made no public statement beyond insisting she had meant well. The newspapers and online forums debated her motives, dissecting her grief, her planning, and her actions. For some, she was a tragic figure, consumed by loss and driven to a misguided attempt at replacing what she had lost. For others, she was a cautionary tale of how obsession and careful planning could transform desperation into criminal behavior. In the end, the case of Marissa Clarke became more than a news story. It became a story of how grief can twist the mind, how meticulous planning can hide dangerous intentions, and how a community's trust can be shaken in a single, unbelievable afternoon. Even after the trial, the memory of a calm woman with cash in hand, quietly observing and waiting, lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed it, a haunting reminder of the fragile line between desperation and criminality.